Peace. What's good? How y'all doing? I am Zaza Ali, and welcome to another edition of 60 Days of History with Zaza Ali. Today is day 20, or should I say episode 20, and we will be featuring and focusing on the great, the mighty, the powerful, the historical legend, Pharaoh Hatshepsut. We could say Queen Hatshepsut, and that would be appropriate, but I titled this chapter The Queen That Would Be King for multiple reasons, as we're going to get into in just a second. But those of you guys who have been following me for some time know that Pharaoh Hatshepsut is actually my favorite historical figure. I have always been fascinated by her story, fascinated by what she built, what she created, the legacy that she left, which we can all go down and visit in Kemet and marvel in the beauty and the power and the magnificence of a culture and a civilization and her particular time period, which was ruled by a woman in two different periods: the period where she reigned by herself, and then the period where she reigned co-jointly with Thutmose the Third. We'll get into that as well in just a second. But can we just take a moment to value and appreciate? I was going to do this video and do three different queens and just, go heavy on the queen energy for Black History Month. But Pharaoh Hatshepsut deserves to be honored on her own. I have one separate video that talks about just the architecture of her time period alone, which was marvelous in today's timeline, let alone 3,500, 4,000 years ago. So it is my honor and my privilege for episode 20. I says day 20, but it's episode 20, series 20, etc., to honor Pharaoh Hatshepsut. So after Thutmose the First, who was her father, she was the next great ruler of the dynasty. In 1650 BCE, Thutmose I, her father, elevated her to the position of co-regent. Following this, in 1628, she became the great royal wife of Thutmose II. In 1615, she ruled as queen regent for Thutmose III, but later deposed him. She proclaimed herself pharaoh in his place, and took the religious titles the female Horus and the daughter of Ra. She was deeply religious and did much to undermine the worship of Set, the deity promoted by the Hyksos and identified as their god Baal. And it's critical to recognize that Baal, Baal, is a deity or a demonic reflection of an evil deity that was being worshipped by the Hyksos people, who were Europeans at the time. And so now, fast forward, we have Balenciaga and that whole connection to Baal, as well as the spiritual warfare that's happening around us. So this spiritual war has been happening for thousands and thousands of years. And Pharaoh Hatshepsut, as a deeply religious queen and leader, was very conscientious of this at the time. She possessed a great curiosity about foreign people in distant lands. She was loved, admired, and respected by both the masses and elites of ancient Kemet. Hatshepsut was also a profoundly religious person and commissioned awe-inspiring projects in honor of the gods. Y'all know I got a thing for architecture, so this is another reason why I love her so much. Most importantly, she understood her family history, a history marked by illustrious deeds and proud traditions. It was the knowledge of her family history, which stretched back through Kemet's 17th dynasty, which we open up this chapter talking about, starting out with Queen Tetisheri, which stretched back through Kemet's 17th dynasty, that served as the basis of Hatshepsut's own character development. Her leading statesmen, both of humble origins, Sinmut and Hapusanab, I hope I'm saying that right. In Kemet, they didn't necessarily pronounce the vowel consonants. So sometimes even Kemet, we spell it as Kemet, but it's actually KMT, right? Um, oversaw her building activities. On the cultural front, great lyric poetry was composed during her period. To effect total control, with the help of her advisors, Hatshepsut usurped the throne and accoutrements meaning kilts, crown, uraeus, and gold braided beard of the living Horus. These events may have occurred during Thutmose Freudian slip, Thutmose the Third's second regnal year. Hatshepsut then became known as Living Horus of the North and South, Ka-Ra, son of the sun, the Horus of gold, the bestower of years, the god of rising, the conqueror of all lands, the lady of both lands, the vivifier of hearts, the chief spouse of Amun and the mighty one. I mean, chief spouse of Amun, are you saying that you're God the Most High's wife? And don't get your religious pennies in a bunch, please. You have to understand the state of consciousness and awareness in the spiritual conditions of this time to have a proper assessment of what's actually being said here. So if you're looking through a religious lens, you're not going to be critiquing or assessing this culture and these cultures from the right lens. She took on all of the associated titles, the titles associated with supreme rulership, except one, the mighty bull of Ma'at, which implied male fertility. Hatshepsut shrewdly concocted one of the most amazing historical stories by announcing she was the male incarnate of Amun. She said Amun, in the guise of Thutmose I, blessed the astonished but elated Amos with his seed, aka Immaculate Conception. Now, that sounds crazy until you start thinking about the concept of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, until you start considering Asar, Aset, and Heru, right? In ancient Kemet, the false beard of the Pharaoh was regarded as a sign of wisdom. Even Hatshepsut, the female ruler, was depicted in the art wearing a false beard. It goes on to say, one of the most brilliant minds that ever ascended, Hatshepsut was one of the most brilliant minds that ever ascended the throne. Her reign was in two parts, one as regent and the other as reigning queen in her own right. There was actually no difference. Thutmose III was too young to exercise any power. Therefore, even before becoming ruler, she was actively pushing for Kemet to take its position as a powerful nation, the expansion of foreign trade, international diplomatic relations, perfection of national defenses, vast public building programs, securing the South and the North through either peace or war, and one of her focuses, building a great navy for both commerce and war. Her success on most of these fronts made her one of the greatest leaders in ancient Kemet. And now she was ruling as great royal mother. She was the virtual sole head of state because Thutmose the third, I keep wanting to say thirst, was being groomed and too young to wield power. And maybe thirst would be appropriate when we consider how they tried to scratch her out of history. There's more detail to that. We talk about all of that in the book, but let me stay on point. The image on your screen, seeing on the screen, is a 7-ton granite sphinx of Hatshepsut, has the body of a lion and a human head, wearing a headpiece and royal beard. This statue can be found at the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art. And again, for people who think that the Kemetic people were worshiping animals and this is why they produce some of these representations, you guys have to step your spiritual metaphysic study when it comes to history up. And I'm saying that being kind of funny, but still. Also, you see on the right-hand side the image of Ma'at, because to me, I think when you look at Pharaoh Hatshepsut's legacy, that she absolutely represented balance and justice. And we know that because even though she had issues historically, you know, especially upon her transition, her body was never found. There's a lot of layers to the story. They tried to scratch her name out of history. The people worshiped her. And when I say worship her, her legacy, her legend, for hundreds of years after she transitioned, and held her in a very high regard. And that is not uncommon in historical figures. A lot of these people who were considered great and highly tapped in and tuned in spiritually were actually worshipped for some time later. Now we could say, well, that's idolatry, but again, we're looking through the lenses of religion on historical concepts, and you have to have a broader understanding of these cultures to really be able to make that assessment. So continuing on here, this is just one passage I wanted to read. This is on page 315. There were five queens. There were five queen pharaohs in Egyptian history: Mernith of the first dynasty, Nitocris of the sixth dynasty, Sebek Neferura of the 12th dynasty, Hatshepsut of the 18th dynasty, and Tawasret of the 19th dynasty. And of course, we can all go back and do our history and do the research on that if there's anybody that takes any issue with that, right? But trying to make sure I got my notes right here. Okay, here we go. When Hatshepsut became regent for Thutmose II on the death of her husband, Thutmose II, for Thutmose III on the death of her husband, Thutmose II, the star of Senmet was truly in the ascendancy. I'm going to talk about Senmet in a separate video because he deserves his own video. But he was put in charge of the quarrying of her two obelisks at Aswan. Hatshepsut also allowed him to dedicate 3 statues in Karnak and excavate a shrine at Gebel el Sisla. Semet was promoted to the position of steward of Amun. He is credited as the architect of the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, largely because he held the post of overseer of works of Amun at Dejer Desira. I always mess that up. I hope I'm saying it right, but if I'm not, you guys can politely correct me in the comments. Semet led an expedition to Aswan, which entered the mountain, a term explaining the process of cutting obelisks, and brought to Waset the magnificent obelisks which graced the ancient temple complex. They measured a mixture of electrum, which is gold, and silver to coat the pillars. I'm not going to get all the way into the end of that, but I just wanted to, when we talk about alchemy, all right, this is 4,000 years ago now, where we are mixing the combination of gold and silver, which was called electrum, right, to produce obelisks. So imagine when these obelisks and these statues were in their prime, the magnitude and the brilliance that could be seen of them from miles and miles and miles and miles away. At the top of one obelisk, Hatshepsut had inscribed that she was the living Horus and had solar blood, which designated her as the sun's male heir. She had to make sure her designated heir would rule Kemet after her death or descent from the throne. And that was of course, as it pertained to her daughter, who ended up transitioning very young and was not able to take on the position of Pharaoh after her mother was no longer in a position of leadership. So she also did the expedition to Punt, and I'll probably do a separate video about that because Punt in of itself, which is located somewhere in the Somalia. There's an argument about whether it was in Somalia or Yemen, but we know it was in that particular area. But there is a lot of mysticism and fanfare and powerful information pertaining to these two powerful queens. Hatshepsut sending a very large, very, very, very large party and gifts and offerings down to Punt to make an agreement to take them into the fold in terms of her, her rulership, her kingdom, her queendom, and also the transference of goods, right? At Karnak, she erected 2 giant obelisks that rose almost 100 feet. I already read this part, pardon me. The reliefs carved in the great temple in her great temple records the most famous of all expeditions, the mission sent by the 18th dynasty queen Hatshepsut to the land of Punt. You can see the image on the left is another statue of her. Um, the reliefs depict the delight of the ancient Egyptian explorers in their discoveries: ivory, ebony, gold, date palms, giraffes, lions, cheetahs held onto leashes, and baboons clambering over the rigging of 5 ships as they were loaded with treasure for the queen. For centuries, legends of Punt had fascinated Egyptian mariners. Expeditions had set out as early as 2800 BCE during the reign of the 5th dynasty of Pharaoh Sahura. The inscriptions of Hatshepsut maintain that Punt was only known from mouth to mouth by hearsay of ancestors, and then make the claim, but I have led them on water and on land to explore the waters of inaccessible channels, and I have reached the terraces of incense. The precise location of Punt remains a mystery. Uh, Frankincense and myrrh grew on both sides of the Red Sea in Ethiopia, Somalia and Yemen, although in latter centuries it was South Arabia that was most associated with the luxury trade of the desert. However, the reliefs at Deir al-Bahri depict giraffes, and the inscriptions refer to heavy rains in Punt causing the Nile to flood, suggesting that it must have been located on the African side in the region of Ethiopia. And the frankincense and myrrh trade is still heavily viable in both of those areas of Yemen and Somalia as well. There were over 100 limestone sphinxes, 22 granite sphinxes, 40 limestone statues of Hatshepsut, and 28 granite statues of Hatshepsut. And you can see there on your screen, this is her mortuary temple. Again, unfortunately, her body was not laid to rest there, which means that there was probably some sort of descent happening at the time that she transitioned. Simnet's body was never recovered either, but this is located at her temple in Luxor, Egypt. And one day, very, very soon, I plan on gracing these lands. I plan on doing Walk With Me from Kemet. And we're going to walk through and talk through all of these beautiful areas, because this will absolutely be a dream come true for me, to be in the presence of this beautiful architecture and this powerful, powerful, powerful history. So again, Pharaoh Hatshepsut is one of my absolutely most favorite historical figures, and you can see the images of her on the left again. At Hatshepsut's command, Semet designed and supervised her temple on a site sacred to Hathor in western Waset. It sits at the end of a long valley built into high cliffs. The design has a clean, uncluttered look and appears to complement the landscape, like a line between heaven and earth, with its series of courtyards, each smaller than the first, colonnades decorated with reliefs, shrines, inscriptions, and painted reliefs. Zosru recorded much of Hatshepsut's history. Centuries later, the Greeks would adopt its architectural style for their structures. That's important, because in modern times we think that this type of architecture was actually created by the Greeks, later on passed on to the Romans, and then later on picked up by Kemetic architects, etc. No, that is not true. We have plenty of verifiable information that this style, particularly the colonnades, started, and the courtyards started and was created right here in Kemet. And you can see, if my computer would move with me, work with me, rock with me, the images here of yours truly. These pictures are in my book too, in the intro pages, of myself with the statues of Pharaoh Hatshepsut in the Brooklyn Museum. That one there on the right shows the full body statue, and then that one on the left shows a different statue, right? I think we kind of look alike. I don't know. What do you guys think? But anyway, just to emphasize the point of how much her historical legacy has meant and does mean to me. And I've always said, in these times where maybe we feel like there's a shortage of women to look up to, for our daughters to look up to, for our women to look up to, these are the type of women that I was looking up to growing up. And this is why history is so important and so powerful. So again, that was one of my motivating factors for creating Ancient People. And again, this book is heavy on the queen energy. 3 of the chapters are centered around queens, and then 2 of the chapters are centered around kings and the masculine energy. Ancient People is a social studies and history textbook, a full color, 349 pages technically, but now I've split the book into 2. I'm going to have to update this. The physical reader version of the book is 250 pages, and the workbook part of the book, which have now been split into 2, is 170 pages. Don't quote me on that. Anyway, Zaza Ali presents Volume 1 of an ongoing series dedicated to the ancient peoples of the world. This first edition of Ancient People details the 700-year rulership of the Moors in Spain, as well as Queen Lili Ukulani and Hawaii's last monarchy. We dive into the ancient queens of Ethiopia and Kush, as well as Nubia in the south, and their connection to Kemet, aka Egypt, in the north, including the great Pharaoh Hatshepsut. Did Africans migrate to Asia, or were the native Chinese and Japanese indigenous to their homelands? In this book, we cover extensively the Moors in Spain, Queen Lili Ukulani and Hawaii's last monarchy, Africans in Asia, the Kandakis of Ethiopia and Kush, Pharaoh Hatshepsut and the 19th dynasty in Kemet. This book is available in paperback and hardcover, and the workbook is not available quite yet on my website, but it will be in the next couple of days as soon as I get my proofs in, and I'll be sharing those with you guys as well. But available in paperback and hardcover. I will put the information in the description if you would like to get your copy. info@zazaali.com is my email address. zazaali.com is my website. Peace and love. And happy reading, and happy studying, and happy researching, and much love to all of my history buffs and history nerds such as myself. Peace and love.